We have Deb Margolis joining us. Deb is from Merrimack College, where she leads their school counseling program, and she's also in their human health and human services. Is that the name?
Human Development and Human Services.
Sorry. She has been a longtime friend of Catholic Memorial in terms of she's a former board member. She's worked with a lot of our students. She's a consulting school psychologist with our entire counseling department from middle school through high school. So she's worked with our boys and knows them intently, and she's always a great sounding board for me and for the other counselors that we have in terms of some of the issues that seem a little bit beyond our reach. We love to bounce them off Deb, and she's always a fantastic resource. And with that, I think, Deb, one of the reasons we wanted to pull you in this morning virtually, and definitely thanks for everyone for joining us. There are so many challenges that we're dealing with now as a community, and especially as parents, as we think about some of the things that we're facing, not only how to necessarily describe what's going on, because we've kind of passed that phase, but now we're in this maintenance period and things keep going. And we're not really sure necessarily how everything is different, but things feel different overall. And I guess with your background and your experience, kind of what makes this experience different as a parent and working with a student, and any insights or advice you might have about that.
Sure. I'm sure I don't have any wisdom that the people in the room don't also have, but I think maybe as we come together collectively, we can come up with some collective wisdom. I also am the proud parent of one teenage boy, a 16-year-old who's a junior in high school, and a 19-year-old who is unhappily home from his freshman year in college, and reminding us each and every day that he wishes he was in the dorm. So I understand this understand or don't understand this on many, many levels. So I certainly also can empathize and I can empathize and identify with the parent experience. So I think one of the things about this crisis, there are so many things about this: the unprecedented nature of the crisis, the unpredictable nature of the crisis. But I think I've been thinking about this a lot. And one of the things that is most difficult about this current situation, I think, is that we are faced with the crisis at exactly the same time as our kids are faced with the crisis. So we don't have any adult time to get used to it. We don't have any adult time to talk to other adults because we're stuck at home with our kids. And we don't have our regular workplaces or our shopping or our other family obligations or other opportunities to really sit down with our other adults and work it through and talk about it and talk about our worries or laugh about what's going on. And instead, we're all trying to manage it at the very same time as our kids are trying to manage it. And then we're trying to help them manage it, but we don't have any adult time to manage it. So I think that's one of the things that's making this particularly challenging, is the combination of the isolation piece as well as the unprecedented piece, as well as the fact that we were all smacked with this all at the same time. And I think that that's somewhat unusual. I mean, it's more typical now than it was when we were all growing up, where there was a real lag between the time that news happened and the time we heard it. And now in our 24/7 sort of social media, we hear everything just as it's happening. Many things hit us at the same time as it hits our kids, but this just is unrelenting. And every day it's something new. Every hour it's something new, and we just don't know. So I think that's part of it, Jack. That's part of it.
Sorry, I had muted myself there for a second. And
that's all right.
As we think about, as we're adjusting to everything and the unprecedented nature, and we are that real-time component that you mentioned, I think one thing that we hear, at least in counseling circles a lot, is it's okay to not be okay. That if this is difficult for anybody, this is difficult for everybody. That feeling of, I'm struggling with this right now, or my family is struggling with this, or we don't really have, it's week 7 and we still haven't developed a routine that works for us yet. On some level, that's fine. But that also can create a level of uncertainty. So how can we kind of take that idea of it's okay to not be okay and turn it into a guiding principle that works for me or my family?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that we need to all give ourselves license as both parents, as teachers, as professionals, is to just be in do the best you can mode. I think that there is no such thing as perfect parenting during this time. I think we don't even know what that would be, even if there were ever such a thing. And also to know that we aren't in this alone, and that I think very often as parents we don't share the realities of what goes on in our own houses with other parents, because we're afraid that it's only in our house, or we're embarrassed that it's happening. Or, I laugh about it all the time. Every once in a while, when you do sort of share something, I'll say to my colleagues, do you ever walk into your kitchen and every single cabinet is open, and you say to your kids, hey, and they go, what? Like they don't notice it at all, and everybody laughs. Or you walk into the room and there's stuff all over the floor, and do you not see that? So I think those kinds of things happen under normal circumstances. And think about how unusual this circumstance is. Really how crazy the circumstance is. We're all home all the time. 2 or 3 days into this crisis, I thought to myself, I decided a long time ago not to homeschool. In fact, I never even thought about homeschooling, and here we are. It's not something we would have ever chosen to do. And on top of everything else, we're homeschooling through through a computer, and our kids are sort of computer natives. We're computer immigrants. So it feels there's something very unreal about it. We can at least see each other's faces, but there's nothing real about this sort of experience. And on top of that, we're trying to monitor what they're doing, and they don't want us to monitor what they're doing, and we don't really want to have to monitor what they're doing. So I think that there are just so many different levels, but every expert out there who is weighing in at this point is saying, give yourself a break. Your kids are going to watch more TV than you might like them to, and they're going to be on their screens much more than you would like them to. And no, they're not doing their homework or their schoolwork on their screens necessarily. And they're going to binge watch everything in Netflix. My younger son told me last night, one of his friends, that he's watched so much Netflix, he's sick of it and he doesn't want to watch anymore. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of Netflix to watch, to say that you're sick of it and you don't want to watch anymore. But I think that all of those things are really, that's our current reality, that we're making all sorts of accommodations to just kind of get through the day and figure it out till the next day. Certainly, I imagine that most of you would agree that typically we would chase the kids out of the house and tell them to play outside and tell them to go find something to do. And it's not it's not safe to do that. They can play in our yards, but there's also no place for them to go. And we can't get teenagers together because social distancing is not at all a teenage notion. They just don't get it. And that's okay. They really shouldn't get it. Some of the boys, I'm sure, are very worried about the virus. Other boys are very annoyed that they have to stay at home. So that there's a whole continuum there too. And again, I think give yourself a break, do the very best you can, find ways to connect with other adults and share more genuinely and authentically, so that you don't feel so stressed and so boxed in your own house. That would be some of the advice that I would give for sure.
I love your story about the cabinets, in part because my wife and I because we're sharing so many workspaces these days, we've created a fictional coworker named Cheryl who lives in our house. And so anytime there's a coffee cup left around or somebody hasn't put their plate away, it's like, oh, geez, Cheryl's showing up again. Cheryl's on real thin ice with HR these days, but we'll, at least we're not bickering at each other. As we're talking about the amount of Netflix our kids are watching these days, or the things that they can't do, or that, the fact that they're not doing homework, one of the lines that we always have to come up with ourselves as a parent is, where is my line of compassion and where is my line of accountability? And I think drawing that line is particularly difficult in a situation like this, where there's going to be a lot of days that people are deserving of compassion, and then we're still trying to, as great as the program is and we're moving forward and people are getting grades and we're doing all of that, it can be difficult to maintain motivation at this time of year. Sure. With everything else going on. And, as you think about that, with your perspective, how would you advise a parent about what that line is between compassion and accountability?
So another great question. I think, first of all, I would just say from one parent to other parents, um, thank your lucky stars that your kids are at a school that went all online so quickly, that was able to pivot and provide an online program, because lots of kids are out there without an online program, and certainly without anything to do every day. Maybe there's an hour, or maybe there's kind of whatever, some maintenance work that's being done. So I think we have to be very grateful for, even though it's a huge shift in the way the kids have gone to school, schools that did pivot have offered structure that schools that were not able to pivot, and lots of public schools that for a whole variety of constraints can't do the same kind of virtual learning, those kids don't have any kind of structure. So I think that that's great. I would think, on the continuum, compassion and accountability are not, I think compassion and accountability actually can go together very nicely at this time, although I would say you need to be compassionate. You have to look for compassionate ways to hold kids accountable. I would say that, some of the more rigid lines that we might sometimes hold, like what I was joking about before in terms of the certain kinds of screen time, I think those fall by the wayside because there just isn't enough to do. When we look at adolescents, and I look largely at this point at our college students, what they're telling us is that they feel both overwhelmed and bored at the same time, which is a really interesting combination. Because typically you wouldn't think about boredom going with a feeling of being overwhelmed. Overwhelmed would seem to go with, I have too much to do, I don't know, I don't have a chance to breathe, but I have so much to do, or I feel, and I think the overwhelmed is this emotional thing. There's this huge emotional overlay over everything. And if you ask a lot of adults to name sort of three things they're thinking, many adults will tell you exhausted or tired, even though we're getting up later, we're not leaving our houses, we don't have to commute, we're juggling work in a weird way. Many of us are probably working way more than we did, because instead of commuting, we're at the computer an hour earlier and an hour later. But there is this emotional sort of exhaustion that isn't coupled by physical exhaustion, because there's only so much walking around your neighborhood you can do to get yourself fully exhausted. And I think the kids are, the same thing is happening with the kids. I think we also, but at the same time, we don't want all of our structures to fall apart, because we need to keep certain things. So we don't want kids' day and night cycles to turn upside down. It's really easy for us all. You can stay in pajamas all day and you don't get out of bed until 3 p.m. And then lo and behold, you're not tired at night, so you're up until 2 a.m. I think that those kinds of daily rhythms and daily schedules need to stay in place, because those are the health related things and the mental health related things. I think even around schooling, the most important component is that we're getting the kids together. We have them on a schedule, and we have them socially connected as best we can in a distancing sort of way. Much more important really even than the material. Kids will catch up on the material. It's great that CM is doing schooling. I think that's fabulous. But I think that the even more important contribution that you're making to the lives of the boys is that you have them on a much more regular schedule, and you have them in some kind of social interaction. I think that's really, really critical. I think the other thing as parents, we need to learn, I think, to take sort of parent breaks, because we're just not accustomed to that 24/7. We do it a little bit over the summer, but over the summer we can go out and we can do things. So I think our nerves can get frayed. I certainly find myself frequently during the course of the day feeling like somebody has just stomped on my very last nerve. And I'm not a short-tempered sort of gal, but I feel strung out a lot of the time, and trying to figure out how to be compassionate about kids and also compassionate about yourself, that we're not super people. We just need to be, we're human, and we're doing the best we can. But I would say that accountability around a somewhat regular schedule, logging on when you're supposed to be logging on, and so that when we finally do start to emerge from the crisis, you're not also trying to get kids back on a schedule where they're up by day and asleep by night. That's what I would say in terms of general guidelines. Other than that, I would be in somewhat compassion overload as long as kids are being respectful. A really important lesson during this time, and trust me, I'm working at it constantly, is that we're all in this. We're all in this as a community. We're all in this as really a world, and certainly as a family, we're all in this together. So we need to be mindful of the fact that everybody's feeling stressed and everybody's feeling shut in. And yes, we're the adults and it's our job to help the kids, but it's also kids' job to be mindful of that and respectful of that, and also compassionate. Like, everybody needs some compassion here. Give me a break, pal, right?
And just to add to that a little bit from a programming perspective, one of the great things that I really value about being at Catholic Memorial is we have a team of counselors and teachers and administrators where we can be flexible and we can work with that compassion. And I mean, we don't want the default to be, let's put everything off and, extend deadlines and change things like that. But if you really need something, we'll find the right fit for what you need and support you through that. So if you're experiencing something like that as a parent, you have partners at Catholic Memorial that it's not happening to you in isolation, and it's not something that's just your family, and it's not something that your kid has somehow left the program all on their own. We're all experiencing this in some way. And I think, Deb, I've listened to some speakers who have referred to this period and what we're experiencing as a national community is really this overall feeling of community grief, and that we're experiencing this grief together. And that could be about very real things in terms of the loss of someone close to us, or a parent losing a job, or that could also be the grief that a high school boy might experience because, he can't see his friends anymore. My 5-year-old daughter is very sad she can't go to friendlies. So there are some of those areas of like grief and loss that people are experiencing in different ways. How might we all, as parents or our children, be exhibiting some of those signs of grief? And then how can we normalize those conversations in our lives to sort of help each other through it?
Another set of really good questions. How we normalize it, I'm not really sure. I think we, especially with teenagers and especially with teenage boys, I don't know about all of you, but you have conversations in sound bites, right? Just about as much as they can tolerate at a time before you're the most annoying person on the planet, or when they want to talk, which is usually when you don't want to talk, like you're done, right? And then all of a sudden they're chatty. One great, I always find that a great place to have conversations is in the car. You have a captive audience, they can't go anywhere, but we're not really going anywhere in the car. Although finding a place to drive to can sometimes work, because we can at least still go out and drive. But I think that being able to acknowledge how you feel about it and being able to acknowledge what's going on for you can go a long way, because I think most kids think they're alone in it. And even boys who really don't like school really miss school. They miss the structure, or they miss the social component. And I mean, if we think about it, we've all lost so much in so many different ways. I mean, some people have clearly had kind of the ultimate losses of loved ones, clearly, and then losses of jobs and losses of other kind of finances. And we have all struggled with, like, our world has turned upside down, and it happened so quickly. Like, we saw stuff was happening overseas. We didn't take it as seriously as we should have. We really insulated ourselves, and we figured that would never happen here. It would be different, whatever, all of those kinds of things that happen. So I think even, first of all, allowing ourselves to see the profound level at which our lives have changed and will probably never be the same. I mean, it really will be a new normal. Now, things will, over a period of time, I think things will settle, but I don't know that things will ever fully go back to the way they were beforehand. Even if they do, in terms of everyday practice, our thinking will have changed. And certainly there's lots of research to suggest that when we struggle with unrelenting stress over a period of time, our brain chemistry changes, just our tolerance for things and the vigilance, that kind of like what's going to happen next. And I think that that's what adults are all struggling with. And I think kids as well, if we think about seniors in high school. So seniors in high school, all of those kinds of milestones that they expected are not going to happen or aren't going to happen the same way. Juniors in high school who were preparing to visit colleges, they're not going to visit, or they're not going to visit in the same way. So, it trickles down to, as I don't need to tell you because you're all living with this, but the 10th graders, the 9th graders, 7th and 8th, everybody's having a very different experience. The sports season they were looking forward to isn't going to happen now. They're wondering what's going to happen with the fall season. Nobody's really talking about it. We can't talk about it because we don't really know. We don't want to say it will happen for sure and then have to turn around and say it won't, but we don't want to say it's not going to happen because we're really hopeful that it will and that we can figure out ways to make it happen. So I think that having open conversations is a good thing. I think asking, you can ask some open-ended questions with teenagers. We know that doesn't work. Like, how are you? Fine. What's it? Nothing. I don't want to know. I think, but being available when they are ready to talk about something, and maybe even watching something together. I actually have suggested to people to watch the national news together, not as a scare tactic, but as more as a prop or as a prompt to talk about things. Because I think a lot of teenagers get into this, I really don't want to know, or what does this have to do with me, or I hate politics, or I don't care about the news. I mean, some kids care about all of those things, but typical teenagers feel like it doesn't impact their lives very much. And right now it's impacting their lives in very significant ways. So I think be ready to talk when they are ready to talk, which isn't going to be when you want to talk. Put some things out there for them to think about. Let them know that you're there, and let them know that that you do understand that this is a difficult time. I think sometimes when we don't want our kids to struggle, we tell them this isn't such a big deal, or you have so much to be grateful for. I do that all the time with my kids. Like, oh, you have so much to be grateful for. We should be thankful. Now, I think that that's really true. And we go over it. We have our health. We have a home. We have food. We have jobs. I think that those are important messages. Another thing that can be really useful, and this is true across the board whenever we're struggling, is to find ways to help other people. If we can help others, it makes us feel better about ourselves, but it also enables us to make that kind of contribution. And even though we're at a distance, there are all sorts of ways to be helpful. And certainly if you can monitor your teenagers in being helpful. So for example, food pantries everywhere. Food pantries are empty. They're seeing twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the number of families that need weekly groceries. So is there a way to sort of help out that way? Is there a way to make a neighborhood collection? Is there a way to write cards? There are lots of places that are looking for cards and letters for elderly, or for people who are shut in for one reason or another. Things for first responders, certainly. I saw the other night that Mass General Hospital was collecting phone cords and chargers for patients who were there so that they could stay in touch with families, because people can't bring anything in. So I think that there are ways that we could mobilize kids to help others, which gets us out of ourselves a little bit. And I think, that would be something that I would suggest would be worthwhile as well.
Thank you. And just to sort of say it, to open it up to the group, that we're coming to kind of the tail end of the structured conversation portion of this. If you have any questions of your own and you want to add them to the chat box, or if you want to, you can open up the participants tab and you can raise your hand that way, and we can get some other voices involved. And as we're sort of coming to a close, Deb, you opened with the this great fact or great statement that we're all dealing with this at the same time that our children are dealing with this. And as we're talking about having those conversations and we're thinking about ways to engage in some ways we have to be able to articulate what we ourselves are experiencing. And as you think of beyond kind of the things that we can do, the donations that we can make, or even like how we're going to set up a schedule for the day, as we look through this drastic shift that we've all gone through over the past month and a half or so, like what are the things, if you were advising someone about how they could articulate their own experience through this and what they've experienced themselves, how could we start to kind of reflect on our own experience and put that into words and put that into something that we can then share with our families and engage in those conversations?
Well, I mean, w- there. I'll answer on two levels. One way to start on the most concrete level is to think for yourself about how your life has changed in 6 short weeks, and actually how it changed really overnight, because that's exactly what happened. We sort of went to sleep one day, and the next day everything was different. So I think that it's important for each of us to think about that, because going back to your question about grief, to really hold on to what is it that's so destabilizing about this, because that's some of what's happening, is that there's this huge feeling of instability, even when we have relative stability. So I would say that, you know, I feel relative stability in my life, and yet I look all around and it feels destabilizing. My very first meeting yesterday morning was with a colleague who seemed very harried, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "It's already a Monday, and I don't even know what day it is." Now it happened to be, it happened not to be Monday. It happened to be Tuesday, but she was talking about something we all understand what that. Oh, it's a Monday morning. When we try to shift back from the weekend, we can't even shift. Like every day's a weekend, but it's not a weekend. And then we're trying to work, but we can't really. So I think that if we would do ourselves a favor, and I haven't done this, but if we would do ourselves a favor if we made a list of, okay, what are the concrete ways that things have changed? One of the things that's been really helpful for me is to look at all the funny things that get posted online about what's going on now. And there are lots and lots and lots of them out there. Some are in better taste than others, but there are many of them. And then to share them with friends and laugh about them, because I think most importantly, we have to find things to laugh about when we have things to laugh about. um, because I think that's one way, that really is one way to cope. This would all be easier if we knew that on such and such a day we were going to be done. I think that's one of the things that's so hard. So it was April something, and then it was May 4th, and now it's May 18th. But daycare centers are closed through the end of June. What does that mean? Both of my boys are lifeguards. They keep saying, is it going to open over the summer? Or are we going to have jobs? And I keep thinking, like, if there's a God, it's going to open over the summer and you're going to have jobs. But, all I can say is I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that something will open, and at some point we have to start. I mean, I'm not a proponent of reopening things now. I think we're wise in Massachusetts to keep things closed for a while longer. I think the most important thing is that we don't want to rush back into our more regular lives only to flip back into this suspended sort of animation. But I think we have to admit to ourselves the kinds of grief or losses that we're feeling, or instability, in order to even begin to understand what the boys are feeling.
And I think what you're sharing there is so well aligned with the question that we got in the chat box, in terms of, there are so many things that we've canceled already, and that students have worked towards one goal, or they thought that they were working towards one thing, and then that got canceled, and then we have to pivot and sort of change that again. And even as we look forward to a summer job or a summer program or classes in the fall or the SAT or fall sports, how do you sort of fight off that cynicism that could come, that, oh, it's just going to get canceled anyway? What's the point of working on this now? How do we find motivation through that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think that goes back to sort of your compassion accountability question, that what we're doing during these times is we're walking a fine line constantly. Like we could get really demoralized and not get out of bed, because who knows when this will all end. At the same time, we don't want to be sort of Pollyanna-ish and be like, everything's fine. And, I don't know what you're so worried about. I think we need to find that. I think that it's fine to be hopeful and say we plan forward, because there's good reason to believe that things will begin to return to normal over a relatively short period of time. Again, unprecedented. I mean, I think we should use this as an opportunity to build resilience, that we do survive, that we do get from one day to the next, that we take the precautions that we can, we try to make ourselves as safe as we possibly can, but that we don't lose sight of our goals, because this isn't, it seems very long-term because it's been 6 to 7 weeks of this, but in the grand scheme of life, it hopefully won't be long-term. My older son said to me at one point, he said, "Mom, this is the kind of thing I'm going to tell my grandchildren about, that I lived through this." I said, "That's exactly right." So trying to create that kind of historical perspective, you know, you think about 1918, you think about, which is what we hear in the news all the time, but that we don't give up. We are resilient. And part of our strength is that we say, all right, well, we don't just throw in the towel because it might not happen. We keep at it because it probably will happen. And even if the immediate goal that we had planned on, the spring sport we had planned on, didn't happen, that being prepared for that is part of a much bigger picture of overall health, of overall preparedness, of resilience, of motivation. But I think at the same time, we need to understand that as this wears on, we all start to lose our motivation. You know, the first few weeks, even the Zoom stuff, it had, one of my colleagues said, a new car smell to it. Well, we all know what happens to the new car smell over a period of time. And we get to Zoom fatigue. By the end of the day, I just want to peel the screen. It feels like it's on my face. I just want to take it off my face. So I think that that's happening at the same time. So mixing it up a little bit and figuring out how to do things a little bit differently. But that ultimately, when we practice for a sport or we get ready for a performance, that's something we really are doing for ourselves and for our own growth. And that we're able to do it as part of a team is a real bonus and benefit. But we shouldn't pull back from all of it, because there will be other opportunities that kind of training is good for, even if it doesn't pan out in the immediate, in the immediate future. But that's hard to say to teenagers who really live in the moment. Those of you who've heard me talk before know, long distance for a teenager is the tip of their nose. That's as far as they see. So just keeping that in mind. So saying, "Oh, you're doing it for your future." Yeah, all they hear is rah, 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 rah. They don't hear any of that. So it is finding intermediate goals, shorter term reasons to do things.
And I think, that's such a great point. And so much of our work, as adults, whether we're working in a school or we're working as a coach or we're living as a parent, so much of it is we understand that whether you get a 78 or an 80 at the end of the third quarter, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really make a difference. However, so many of the things, it's like, well, did you do that little extra effort? Or, the difference between a 93 and a 94, that, those are the long-term skills, whether or not you win the game, the way that you practice and prepared for the game. And right now, any training that people are doing, if you're running, if you're lifting weights, if you're just going out and throwing a ball against a wall, whatever it is, some of that is just, okay, I'm moving and I'm not giving into that cynicism. I'm not giving into that fatigue. I'm trying to find ways to keep myself motivated. That, again, it becomes person-centric.
Right. And also, reminding ourselves and reminding our boys that physical activity also gets those good brain chemicals running. So that for that reason alone, when you start to feel sort of demoralized or debilitated, get out and move, because your brain then feels better and overall your whole self feels better. And I think it could be, with some boys, this wouldn't work with all, but with some boys, it might be worth saying, what do you think you're going to remember most from this time? Is it going to be your Netflix? And which might be okay too, that whatever it is, but getting them to think about it a little. What would you want to tell somebody about this experience? Because someday you probably will tell it as part of history. Your kids will learn about it as history, and you'll be able to say, I was part of that, and certainly grandchildren for sure.
We had Gen X, then we had the millennials, now we have the Tiger King generation. So they've all...
Right. The COVID Tiger King.
COVID Tiger King. We had another question come through that was just in terms of looking for conversation starters, and you mentioned the national nightly news, that you could watch it as a family and talk about that. Are there other maybe movies or TV shows, things that might have themes related to, I don't know if we should necessarily be watching Outbreak all over again right now, but are there things that we could maybe be watching as we do have more time together as a family that might stir conversations in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things there definitely are things that probably you can watch that are, you can look at, I mean, like the movie Contagion. Has anybody seen the movie Contagion? That's well, if you haven't seen it, um, there, it is eerie. It's a little bit like reading 1984 and thinking, oh my God, how did they know? Well, Contagion is the same thing. It's about the coronavirus. Now, coronavirus has been around for a long time. There are various coronaviruses, but it's a very, in some ways, frightening and creepy show, but it's a real conversation opener. I'm not suggesting necessarily that it's appropriate for doing, you might want to watch it yourself first. I would say to do something else lighter. I would say to choose a Netflix series and watch it as a family. Without heavy conversation. I think the best way to talk to teenagers often is as a by the way. The same way that boys don't necessarily get together, they don't say, oh, do you want to get together to talk? They play video games, or they, play pickup basketball, and conversation happens as a result of that. And I think that that's part of the way to do it, and even if it's Tiger King, however absurd that is, to watch it together for its absurdity and be able to laugh together about its absurdity. I think that all of those are great scaffolding and props for ways to interact, instead of how are you feeling today, or, what's stressing you out today, but rather just like, all right, we're now having this other shared experience. Isn't this ridiculous? Let's talk about this. If you haven't watched, if you've watched the Netflix series All American, you familiar with that? That's amazing. Amazing. Very, very much worth watching. There are 2 seasons of it, so you can really binge up a storm. And apparently there'll be another season coming out, but it's very, very good. And it's a great series for CM boys to see. I think just wonderful, wonderful, with lots of openers and lots of ways to talk about really pertinent kind of teen issues and social issues and issues of equality and inequality, and it's all around athletics and adolescent relationships. It's terrific, terrific, terrific. So I would urge that if you haven't seen that, I would start there. That's a great family watch. I see some people are nodding, so that's great.
It's an old one, but Friday Night Lights. You want to have
Yes.
teenage conversations, like that's a great one. If you haven't, pull that. And there's like 5 seasons there. So
yes, it's similar, and I would say, yeah, very similar. I would say All American is even better, but yes, I think similar kinds of things.
And a question that comes through, and I think this is one of the conversations that we would be having in a normal year, just kind of the differences between high school boys and high school girls. A parent sharing, her college freshman daughter is engaging in FaceTime and Zoom, and she's reaching out to her friends, and her son is much more, he'll respond when somebody reaches out to him, but he's not necessarily creating plans or reaching out. Is that something, should we be pushing social interaction right now? Should we be saying, get out and talk to your friends? Should we sort of let people fall into their own mold? And then also, as we look at the end of the school year, how do we find some structure after that point?
So yes, yes, and yes. So yes, we should be pushing social interaction, but we just need to be mindful of who the kids are. If you have a son who's generally relatively quiet and has 1 or 2 close friends, then just make sure that he's connecting with 1 or 2 close friends. He doesn't need to be FaceTiming with the whole world to show that everything's okay. If you have a kid who's really social and they're not, that's, I would come back through the counseling office and talk about that a little bit. I think urging kids to organize things, especially social kids, like, like an online party. All right, get all your friends together. They're very easy parties to monitor. It's great. Nobody's in your house and nobody's drinking in your house. It's a terrific way to have a party. So I think but it is very important to make sure the kids are staying connected at the level that they would typically be connected. It's not important that kids have tons and tons of connections, but it's very important that they have some. Some kids are more and less comfortable on both social media or in any of these media. It's a weird thing. I have friends now who say, do you want to Zoom? It's like, no, just call me on the phone. I don't want to Zoom. Um,
We planned
but
for this with a phone call, and it was the best meeting I had all week. It was great.
was awesome, right? One of my colleagues said, it's not a beauty pageant. We don't need to see each other's faces all the time. We could just talk by phone. So I think that for some boys, it really is pushing it to be, on all the time that way. I just read an article last night, interestingly, about video games, because usually the articles about video games are they're bad, they're terrible, that's too much. And this particular article talked about the importance of social interaction around video games. And that if you have kids who are, especially if they're not using it too much and they're not playing violent games, it is one of the ways that boys interact. And that it's much better for them to play interactive games with somebody they know, like get a friend online, than it is for them to be on it all alone for hours at a time, or playing with strangers, which can be tricky as well. So I would say all the different ways that you can find for boys to connect in some meaningful way, whatever that means, that yes, that is important. If you have a boy who seems very isolated or very reluctant to connect, I would reach back to CM and, when we're on ground, we try to figure out ways for boys who are feeling isolated. So we certainly can try to figure out ways for boys who are feeling unusually isolated beyond the isolation that everybody else is feeling.
And for that question about summer, which, as you said before, most of us, there's some sort of pivot to the summer where we're all of a sudden parenting 24/7 and our kids aren't in school. We're making that adjustment. And as we think about, high school aged boys who may have been preparing for a fall sport, or they may have a job over the summer, going to camp, leaving a camp, any of those activities that are now, in doubt if they haven't been canceled. How can we maintain some structure over the summer if, the school day disappears, if some of those other activities are gone?
In some ways, the summer will be more complicated because we will have already had all of these weeks where we've had to create the superstructure for boys in our houses. So typically school created that structure, and we helped with that because we made sure they were at school where they were supposed to be. Summer, there's always that challenge of summer, of how do you maintain structure over the summer. And certainly for many years at CM, we've urged people to be sure that there was some structure over the summer. We all do better. I think you've probably all seen it. I certainly have seen it in myself. We all do way better with structure. This whole idea of not having a usual schedule is, again, very destabilizing. So I would say that for summer, let's be hopeful that there are some of the plans out there, but let's all commit to creating a structure where, again, the daytime is daytime, nighttime is nighttime, and that because that's healthy for everybody. I would hope that by summertime, there's at least enough of a loosening so that if the plans your boys had aren't following through, there still will be opportunities to engage in some kind of group activities, or at a distance even. Mm-hmm. So I would look for those kinds of opportunities for sure. But at a minimum, I would say to maintain the kind of structure you would have tried to maintain in any summer, with the understanding that it will be even more critical this year because we're coming off of so many weeks of weird structure.
As a parent resource, currently, if your son is a sophomore or junior, on the topics page of the counselor advisory, we were creating a listing of summer opportunities, and that was mostly at first summer academic camps and summer academic opportunities. We now have a set of links for some of those programs that have moved online. So if you're looking for an enrichment opportunity, an exploration opportunity, there are programs that are happening in the same way. If you had sent your son to a college for a week to sort of like do an intensive on the ground course or on campus course, some of those programs are now existing online. So, again, it's sort of what is the right fit for you. If your son's not interested in writing or journalism, don't sign him up for an online journalism experience just to have something to do. But, it definitely, we don't have to, going back to that discussion about goals, we don't have to sacrifice some of those long-term goals that we have. We have to look a little harder, and those experiences will look different, but we can still keep on moving in that direction to maintain some of the momentum that we have now.
Yeah, I think that, for example, in terms of activity, I think some of the outdoor boating programs are going to happen. I mean, if you think about the kinds of activities that can happen with more distancing, I think it's much more likely that activities that allow for distance will happen, whereas activities that by their nature are with close contact probably will be cut way back.
Yeah.
So thinking creatively about that. And I also think that after these weeks, it will be more important to find things for the boys to do over the summer, whatever things means. And I'd be happy to reconvene again, do something else in June if it would be helpful to think about the kinds of activities that boys could do over the summer that would be both meaningful and helpful in terms of structure and different from what they've been doing. Online summer programs are great, but just keep in mind that they've been online now. They will have been online for a lot of weeks, and gets kind of worn out, that online thing.
Yeah, absolutely. If there are other questions, by all means, you can unmute yourself and ask a question or raise your hand, and we can do it that way. If you feel more comfortable putting a question in the chat box, we have a few minutes left. So Deb is a fantastic resource. I always want to make sure that we get as much out of her as we can whenever we get to have her on campus, even virtually.
Anybody?
Mary, I just want to chime in on something that you said. It wouldn't be a coffee unless I chimed in somewhere or another. Resilience. The word that you used about resilience.
Mary, I'm going to turn off your video. Could you say that again? It was having a little trouble coming through.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on the word resilience, Deborah, that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of resilience, that ability to bounce back.
I think boys are generally fairly resilient anyway. Yeah.
I don't know how to do this.
Yeah, that I think that sometimes, we tell them in school, or I do anyway, very often, you can only control your own behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a good thought in this venue as well. That what's going on, you can't control it. You can control your behavior. For instance, doing your sports, doing your exercise, getting out maybe, raking a neighbor's lawn, doing those types of things. You can only control your own behavior and your own reaction.
Yep. I think Mary, it's a really great point, that in terms of this feeling of instability, being able to focus on those things that we can control. And I sort of alluded to it, I didn't say it clearly enough, but when we talk to our family members with whom we're living and sort of recognize how we need to be good to one another and patient because we're all feeling that same kind of stress, I think that's something we can control. I think that that's an example. So working with the boys to say, look, as you just said, you can control your own behavior. We can't control what's happening in the pandemic. we can control how we respond, so we don't take risks, we don't behave, we try to take precautions, we try to follow the rules. But yes, we can control our behavior, we can help others, we can continue with our practicing around sports or around arts, or do the best that we can in our schoolwork. Those are things we can control, and that it then gives us a sense of control over in a time that feels very out of control. I think that that's really important. And in terms of resilience, I agree. Most kids are pretty resilient. And what we sort of need to know is that they'll be okay. There are these stories that you can read them in the media of people who lived through really, horrible war-torn times. There was a story about a woman who grew up in Bosnia and was out of school for, I don't know what it said, 4 or 5 years. They were not able to go to school. And her family then immigrated to Australia, where she knew no English. And she eventually went to school. She learned English. She now has a graduate degree. And what she was basically saying is everybody's panicked about what's going to be with the kids. The kids are going to be fine as long as the adults are going to be fine. And so if we can communicate that message that, yes, we're worried, and yes, it feels unnerving, but it's going to be okay. We'll come out on the other side. And I think that certainly builds resilience. But I like that message of we need to control those things that we can control, because if everything's out of control, then it's really a problem.
There was a great question in the chat box about advising high school seniors before, through this, where there's been so much loss of some of those traditional events. I want to close with that if we can, because we do have a hand raised. Jennifer Dunsmore, if you want to ask your question, we'll close with the graduation question.
Right. I don't know if it's a silly question, but one of the things for my son is that working out, and he was on the hockey varsity team, and that was, really structured for him, and it really helped him. He did better in school, and even though he complained about not having any time, is there any way, I've never been in the bubble, so I don't know how big the bubble is. I don't know, is there any way that any of the coaches could organize, if the kids wore masks, maybe, Wednesdays and Fridays at 4 p.m. or something, we run around the track, we stretch, we maintain 6 feet distance with a mask. We use the bubble, we use Clorox wipes after each person uses each, item. Is that completely unrealistic? Or, because I feel like when I suggest the working out and devising a plan, there's plans all over the internet of what sets you could do, but he's not doing them. And because he's lost that friendship role, and he's lost the guidance role of the training director and blah, blah, blah. Is that insane to say that maybe that could happen for certain kids?
I don't think that's a bad question or insane or anything like that. As a school right now, we have to follow guidelines that are beyond our control, that we can't open campus, and we can't have any workouts, and we can't open the bubble or have people on the track. And now Coach Nigerian has been working with the spring coaches. I think he sent an email earlier this week to parents.
Yes, I saw something. I didn't read it yet, but yes.
So I would check that email out, because even if your son wasn't a spring athlete, you could. There are going to be kind of mini online practices with drills and things that a team can still follow together for a little bit of that social aspect. So if your son wasn't going to be a spring athlete, you could always add him to spring track, where these are some, regular running exercises that you can do, and you're going to be doing it for other people. So you would be doing it in isolation, but at least you're doing it in isolation together rather than
Right. That's what I mean. Because he's an only child, and now he's saying, "Mom, this is the worst time to be an only child."
Mhm. Right. And, I think that's a good point that for kids with siblings, there is, at least, even if they're arguing or fighting some of the time,
Right.
there are other teenagers around. But I think that just like virtual school and virtual learning, you can do virtual practice. Hopefully,
True.
hopefully you can have a coach involved to some degree, but even the kids getting themselves together and saying, okay, at whatever time, we're all going to turn on our screens and we'll do our workout. It's not ideal. It's not perfect. It's not what they would choose.
I didn't think of that.
But I think that it's something they can do. And it's certainly worth encouraging him to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And then this last question, which might be, one of the more complicated things, and, as a parent of a senior or thinking of parents of seniors right now, who it's such an emotional transition stage anyway. And now all of those visual markers that we've always had for that transition and growth are being canceled or taken away from us. How would you sort of advise or support a senior student who might be losing some of those activities and the emotions that they would have through that loss?
I would say that going back to your question or the prompt before about the whole issue of grief, giving some space for that being really disappointing. And even if boys won't say it's really disappointing, being able to say to them, it must be very disappointing not to be able to do that. I'm disappointed as well because I was looking forward to your being able to do it. I think just giving them the words to give voice to the feelings. Some of them will be able to articulate them on their own and say, yeah, and they won't say, I'm really disappointed. Probably aren't the words they're going to use. But I think finding ways to help them verbalize that, and it is very disappointing, and that if we had the choice, we wish it weren't happening. But again, back to that, there are things we can control and things we can't control. Unfortunately, that's one of them that we can't control. But that doesn't mean it isn't a loss, and it doesn't mean it isn't, hugely disappointing. You've worked so hard, but you've worked hard, you've gained so much, you've gotten so much, you're going to go on to that next stage. And all of the things you've worked so hard for are going to serve you well, even though right this moment, it doesn't feel that way, because right this moment, you feel so disappointed that you're not getting your senior week and those are huge losses. And as adults, I think we just need to acknowledge that those are really huge losses.
And I think that there's also the celebrations that we have had and the traditions that we have had aren't there, but we're, in some ways we're trying to find other ways to celebrate. Is it reaching out to family and friends and have kind of like a secret letter writing campaign, and then you can sort of present a whole bunch of congratulations at one time? Is it creating or staging some sort of family event to celebrate all together and localize that celebration, even though you can't? I mean, at Catholic Memorial, where we're talking about postponing graduation and having that later, and I know other schools are doing it in a variety of ways, whether it's video graduations or presentations or things like that, but trying to find a way to still make it special for your child and just make sure that they know, hey, this is a big deal, that it's, even though we don't have the show, the big deal is still a big deal.
And also, even to plan, if you were planning a party or not planning a party, it might make sense to say, you know what, once some of the restrictions are lifted, we're going to have a real party. Maybe it's outdoors, but something, it may not happen in the timing that you had expected, but we will do it. We'll do it over the course of the summer. We will do, whenever it's lifted, we will, we will have some kind of celebration. The president of Merrimack was joking yesterday that he thought maybe they'll have a prom for all the freshmen next year who missed their prom. That would be a great opening activity for the students to have, which is it's a really cool idea. But I think a lot of schools, particularly private schools, are thinking about, okay, well, we won't have the graduation when we planned, but we will have some kind of, maybe it's next December, or maybe the prom is next December vacation. But I think that certainly for family things, being able to say, as soon as we're told it's safe, we're going to do something that isn't virtual to celebrate this amazing accomplishment.
Awesome. And there was one last question in the chat box. I want to just answer that really quickly. Plans for online social activities for the boys. The peer ministry program has been trying to do some like online virtual lunches and things like that. We haven't done anything at night so far that I know of, but you know, as this continues and we're all kind of trying to find the next right thing that we can do to support our community, that's definitely something that we're going to continue to think about.
And I don't know if your boys have done this, but they can watch movies together, you know, FaceTime and watch movies together. It's not, you know, again, it's nothing like the experience we wish they were having or experiences we were having, but there are some workarounds that at least normalize life in some small ways.
Deb, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure, anytime.
It was really helpful to see you and to talk to you and you know, to lean on your advice and to hear some of these things. For everyone who's in the room, we are, like I said at the beginning, we did record this. We'll be posting this. So if you want to check back later, if you want to refer it to somebody else, it will be available through the website later. Very much.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. Stay well.